Thank you for coming here. It's cool to see that there's so many people here. I'm going to talk about how to automate brag document writing with the use of LLMs. A quick introduction, then I'm going to pose some questions to the audience. So this is me. I'm Ludvig. I work with data primarily at Isomorphic Labs. I'm based in London. Previously, I was working at Early Bird Venture Capital. It's an early stage venture firm that where I built an internal platform to source companies, screen them, so meaning going from the top of the funnel to the most interesting ones, and then due diligence, so diving deeper into those ones. Quick disclosure for my employer, the views here are completely my own, the tech is my own, side project, just to make that clear. All right, so before I go into this, let me pose a couple of questions. So how many here know what a brag document is? All right, so there's a couple. Okay, how many people write a brag document on a continuous basis? Okay, so fewer. Well, let me pose it like this instead. So how many in here have done something at work or have a contribution that they feel that they should have had recognition attributed to, but didn't get that in the end? I hope that's everyone. Anyways. Well, then this talk is for you. Exactly the last point. A brag document is exactly that. It's for tracking your accomplishments. But for the TLDL of the talk, so the too long didn't listen, I want you to have 3 takeaways from the talk. The first one is really that you should be tracking your accomplishments in a brag document, hopefully. And in turn, this will help you earn what you want, whether or not that is increased scope, increased pay, or a promotion, or whatever you'd like. Second takeaway is really that LLMs, as with everything we've seen, they can help you automate part of this process, saving you both time, energy, and we will see that it also can help you avoid missing out on some of your accomplishments. And then the third key point is here that a Slack/Google Docs workflow that I formalized can help you really sort of make this process less tedious and sort of more automated. For the outline of the talk, for those who want to continue listening, here's the points. So I'm going to talk about first why tracking your accomplishments matter in the first place, right? I'm going to show you what a brag document is and how that helps you do that. Show you the LLM workflow and a toy example of how this helps. And the system design as well with the Google Docs/Slack workflow, and then a couple of resources that I found interesting that could potentially help you. I'll start with a quote. I think everyone can see it, but I'm going to read it out just to be clear. This is a quote for Julie Evans. She wrote the sort of seminal article on brag documents showing how to do that and why they matter in the first place. And I think this is going to resonate with many in the audience, at least resonates with me. So there's this idea that if you do great work at your job, people will or should automatically recognize that work and reward you for it with promotion/increased pay. I want to add to this one with increased scope because I think that's more important, at least in my case. In practice, it's often more complicated than that. Some kinds of important work are more visible/memorable than others. And I think this really sort of, I recognize myself in this because I think there's contributions that I made that should have been recognized. There's also contributions that other people have made that I was recognized for, which I don't think is fair in the first place. So this attribution is wrong, and to make that more clear, we should make sure that we can track our accomplishments in a structured manner, show them to the person who should be seeing it, and make sure that this is done in a regular cadence. So this is really what a brag document is for. But to make that really clear, let me show you the what, why, and the how of a brag document. So really the what, it's a document where you track your accomplishments, preferably tying each of those accomplishments that you made or contributions to an actual goal that is also defined in it. Why would you do this? Well, it's really to make your work measurable and visible, and this will in turn increase the likelihood of you getting increased scope or promotion or pay. And how would you do it? Well, there's many different ways. Just take whatever document you like, really. I do it in a Google Doc. You can take any other document you want and fill it in at a predefined cadence, like weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, 6-monthly, whatever you want. I'm going to dive deeper into those, the leftmost bucket and the rightmost bucket here in the next couple of slides. So for the what here's an example, super simple, but just showing the structure of how I sort of like to put it. There are 4 buckets that I like to put here. Top to bottom, goals. So what are your goals? What is your company's goals? What is your manager's goals? I'll put that in there so that we have that clearly defined. I've also put company values and expectations on software engineer here. And this is really to say, well, depending on the company size and depending on your company, you may or may not have values, of course, and there may or may not be clearly defined expectations, but at least sort of take the latent expectations that your manager has and define them in this document. The next section is projects. So projects is very simple. For each project, define the contributions that you've made. And primarily here, make sure to tie them as in a CV. You don't want to say, I fixed bug X. I fixed bug X because of Y that unblocked person said, for instance, that attributed to project ABC that is important in some sense. The third bucket is mentorship. So here it's really, okay, have you provided mentorship to someone on your team? Have you helped someone? Have you unblocked someone, etc.? And then the fourth section is outside of work. So what have you been doing outside of work that can contribute to your development? So for instance, that could be like what I'm doing here, giving a talk at PyCon, right? Or learning something, reading something that's important. That's the structure, that's sort of the what. Now going into the how. So I like to split this into 3 parts. There's the gathering step, there's the writing step, and then there's the sharing step. So in the gathering step, this is really laying the foundation of the brag document. So it's really saying, okay, what are the goals? Again, going at the top of the document and saying, here are the goals of the company, etc., right? Then there's a writing step. So the writing step is really at a regular cadence, fill in this document, and write down these particular contributions that you've made in these different buckets that we defined before. And then there's the sharing step. So this is pretty clear to define, but just sharing with the person that is supposed to give you that earned increased scope or promotion or pay such that they see your contributions. The sharing step may or may not happen at sort of different cadences depending on how your company defines these steps, right? So I like to have it as on a bi-weekly basis, just sharing a update what I've done, and then on at review period, instead sharing a large document with an executive summary at top to make this really clear what your contributions have been. So now we have this clearly defined process, but if it only was that simple, right, then everyone would do it. So on a personal note, I think for me, at some point, I've been really structured, disciplined, and writing this document and showing my manager, and I think it's really cool, and it gives me, increased scope. But at some point, I do not at all, right? So and that's not necessarily connected to me, right? It's connected to some sort of just like life, right? So priorities happen, different things have higher priority. You want to work on other projects, and sort of this brag document just falls down the to-do list. So I introspected and I thought, okay, if this is not a systematic error, how can I make this process more simple or more efficient, such that it becomes more automated? And again, LLMs taking the world by storm, right? And can here also help in making sure that we can do this. And I tried to look at the process and I said, okay, in the gathering step, sure, we can use some sort of agentic workflow where we actually connect some sort of MCP-ish workflow connecting different tools where we collect data from, but it's not really the lowest hanging fruit, I think. The sharing step, yeah, not really, I would say. There's no low hanging fruit there where we can help, right? But in the writing step, for sure. As language models, it can help really define a sort of brag document entry. So what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is how I've defined this in Python. So a little talk example. And I'm going to show you in particular how an LLM can help you, number one, save time, as I said in the beginning. So save time in the writing. And number two, make sure that you don't forget anything. So it really collects data and uses that to be able to add contributions that you have forgot to put in your manual entry. So to the code, it's again, for example, quite straightforward, but let me give you here the first part, a manual entry that I've written, and then my personal goals that I've defined for myself. So the manual entry here is quite sloppy, as you see, right? It's where there's one project, implement data platform. And there's 2 contributions that I made. I've delivered a design doc, and I've also set up a repo for it. There's no goal contribution or anything, and it's quite sloppily written, right? But this could be an example of a brag document entry. Then the personal goals, pretty sort of standard, but really just, greater efficiency of design work. In the last point, we have contribute to 3 high impact projects. So really just goals that we've defined. System message and prompt. This is maybe a bit of an LLM 101 too, but usually I've used system message, which would clearly indicate to the model, in which direction do we want your answers to be. So I've given here, and this is sort of predefined, and we say, okay, you're a growth-oriented software engineer, always looking to fulfill your personal goals, and you use a brag document to showcase your contributions. So this is just to really say that, okay, we're trying to pull out that inherent knowledge from the model and make sure that it answers in an adequate or appropriate way. Then the prompt, pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of things here I'd like to point out, especially sort of the structure. So I have instructions, requirements, goals, contributions, and making sure that this is quite structurally put into the prompt, make sure that the model answers it more nicely than if you wouldn't do that. I've seen quite a large discrepancy in the way that you define the prompt itself. And I can recommend to use like an iterative prompting method to actually say, refine my prompt that I'm for this particular purpose, given my initial prompt. A couple of things in the requirements that I think is worth to point out. So the third point you see here, it's saying attempt to tie the contributions done to my underlying personal goals. So really here I'm trying to sort of push the model to assign these contributions, or to sort of associate these goals that I've defined to those contributions that I've made. Another one that might be interesting is the third to last one. So augment the manual entry if there's more information via the commit messages and Jira tickets. So this is really just saying, okay, given if there's more information, put it at the end of the manual entry, but make sure that the manual entry itself is like the, let's say the ground truth in some sense. So augment that with the more data. I think there's a couple of more things, but really just say in the contribution sections to be explicit about the type of language that you're given, such that the model can also interpret this in a good way. From toy helpers, this is just to show I'm using GitHub data, I'm using Jira data. That's it basically. But depending on the data that you use, you might want to have different helpers here in data classes to sort of represent your data points. More definitions, don't have to go deeper into this, but really just making use of this data. Another point I want to go through is in the structured output. So this is also a bit of an LLM 101. Structured output allows us to define how the output should look like, or preferably in which type of data class or pedantic based model that the prompt should be, or the result of the prompt should be parsed into. And that allows us to be more structured about the output. You see in the brag document entry in the bottom that I have this projects property. It's a bit of a convoluted way to map a project that I've done to a list of the contributions that I've made. I found it difficult to do this in the base model because of dynamic keys, but this is just sort of up to you how you define it. And then I've used 2 different models here to actually do the prompting. OpenAI, so GPT-4o Mini. I've tried with different models, but sort of you can try it yourself. And then the second model I tried that I'm going to come to later was Gemini. So we don't have to look at this. This is pretty straightforward, but let's look at the output. Sorry for the terrible formatting here in Google Slides, by the way, but it is what it is. What's important out of this output is really looking at the highlighted version here, which is to say that, okay, each contribution that is made, it is actually being tied back to a personal goal that I have. So you see here, my design work proficiency, I want to attribute this contribution to, and it does it by itself. For Gemini, pretty straightforward approach too. I'm using Gemini 2.0 Flash. Of course faster, but in some sense it gives pretty similar output, I would say. What's important about this output, I think, to highlight is the last point. So you see I've implemented initial pipeline for source A, blah, 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 blah. But this was actually not mentioned in the manual entry. So if we go back to the manual entry in the beginning, there was nothing that said something about a pipeline itself. So the model was able to pick this up from my commits and my Jira issues that I've completed and attributed that to the bottom of my contributions. So I think there's two things that I want to highlight out of these results. The first one that came from OpenAI was really to say, okay, it's able to save me time because it's attributing information to the end of my contributions that I don't have to do myself, right? Simple as that. The second thing I think is important is that what it's doing right here, right? It's able to pick up information from the Jira issues and the GitHub messages or GitHub commits to really add a new contribution that I wouldn't have been able to pick up from my initial sort of manual entry. So it solves our two key problems. System design. This is a pretty straightforward one, I think, but something that you could I've worked with. Left to right, we have the data being ingested. So this being re-ingested on a regular basis, whatever format you have, GitHub, Jira, Notion, whatever you use, through a third-party ingester. I use here just because it's, I've sort of put it here generically, but it's really, you can use any third-party ingester. I've used Fivetran here because it's giving us a pretty generous free tier. Store that data in a data warehouse. I use BigQuery, also generous free tier. The sort of middle part with the generate API communicates via Slack and picks up the LLM sort of results. And really the workflow here inside of Slack for us would be that we have a /commit, the summarize contributions command, which would really together with a couple of bullet points of our manual entry, send it off via Slack, which then picks up the data from our data sources, augments that and puts together an entry that it then sends back to us. Inside of the Slack sort of interface, we can then of course sort of iterate on the results and say, okay, be more laid back, add this thing, etc., etc., etc. But really when that is done, when we're happy, we send it off to our manager as an update, or just append it to our Google Doc, to our Bragg document on the right-hand side. With that in mind, I have two things that I want to point out with this approach, and I think it's important to take away. The leftmost side, garbage in, garbage out. We've heard about this in data science and data analysis, right? All these full stop commits or like merge or initial commit or whatever you have, and Jira issues which has fixed bug and not much more. That doesn't help us as much, right? So I think in the end, for me, this created a positive reinforcement loop where I started defining my tickets better and putting better commit messages because it provided me a better Bragg document entry. And in the end, I mean, this can help everyone, right? It helps us, helps our manager, helps the company. The second point is the augmented approach. So really here is to say, I've tried using just the data from my sources, so like Jira issues and commit messages, and tried it with also the manual entry. I find the manual entry plus the data to be more useful, to actually have this approach where we sort of have, if anyone knows about granola, sort of we've written down our notes and then that gets augmented with the transcript from the meeting. Sort of a similar approach here that will allow us to have better entries. I want to leave with a couple of resources, or 4 resources that I found interesting. So the first one is really one to get started writing Bragg documents. It's called bragdocs.com. Just something to get used to the sort of workflow. The second one is a template for a Bragg document in Julie Evans' article. Julie Evans is the person that I took the quote from in the beginning, and this is that article. The third one is from Will Larson. I think many people know Will Larson, CTO at Carta, has written The Elegant Puzzle. He writes a blog post on career narrative, which is not necessarily Bragg documents in themselves, but allows you to sort of say, okay, why would you define sort of this history or this story about your career and your day-to-day contributions. And then the fourth one is a Reddit thread that I actually found quite interesting. Just random people out there, random devs that actually have sort of said, okay, this helped me because of X. I sort of just mentioned why Bragg documents are useful for them. And with that, I want to say thank you. and invite anyone to come chat afterwards.
Does anyone have a question?
Thank you very much. Actually, very relevant topic. At Accenture, we also present ourselves like Bragg documents, but presentations.
Okay.
Can you show the slide with system design, please? I'm curious how many entry points, in fact, we have, or maybe you can elaborate, like user, Gen AI, so for this system.
Can you, do you mean how many, what do you mean by
input
entry points?
yeah, from which points, from which places we have inputs from user, from Gen AI, from any other systems?
Right. So there's, in my case, there was basically 4 inputs, I guess, and 3 come from actual data points on the left-hand side. The user input itself only comes via Slack. So you'd actually communicate with the manual entry, plus also define your goals inside of Slack, which should then be stored in Slack itself. So I use sort of the backend that Slack provides to store that information, and then use that together to define the prompt, if that makes sense. So there's only really, well, the Gen AI input then comes really from you sending off that / command with the manual entry that then comes back via the Gemini or OpenAI call or whatever back to your Slack message interface. So the Python code is executed in the API, in the generate API.
My problem is that you said that you tested some of the models, but you specifically picked the GPT model and the Gemini model 2.0, but we have now 2.5. My question would be, do you have any hallucinations that sometimes the model is not following the instructions that you put in? And have you tested other models too? Because some of them do hallucinate, some of them don't, and some of them have better outputs than others.
Yeah. So I haven't tested 2.5 Pro yet. I basically only tested OpenAI and a couple of models as well as Gemini. With regards to the actual hallucinations, so this is quite simple here. I tried to sort of circumvent that by providing retries. So in some sense, well, they do hallucinate the structure itself, and then that could be solved with the retries and the parsing. When it comes to hallucinating actual contributions, like that happens as well, right? Which is why we have this augmented approach, which is why you would have to say, okay, given that you get the output back, you would actually have to edit it to some degree. Yeah. Oh, a far one up there. Yeah. So it's kind of up to you. I think it's more depending on what you value and also your manager values, right? So some of those contributions are too small to include. Some of those contributions are bigger. I like to include more than less, just to give the sort of the holistic picture. That's on like what I include, and then when I include it, I do it on a sprint basis, so on a 2-week basis, and then providing this full document, which of course requires curation, etc. So it's not fully automated. But in some sense, then on a 2-week basis, and then the long within review period, giving sort of the full picture through a curated document. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the system design slide. It's beautiful. So how did you make it?
Excalidraw.
What?
Excalidraw.
Excalidraw.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I have another question. Okay, so you're talking about corporate. We're bragging to the company. I'm wondering, what have you seen some other outcome from it? Maybe you feel yourself better somehow. You have more confidence, or I don't know. Have you seen a change in your personal life while through this process? I'm curious.
Great philosophical question. No, but I think Well, if we're talking particularly in the corporate, yes, it helps. It also helps when you're actually looking for a new job potentially, which I did from one job to the other. And there you can actually say I did all these things, which you can help in then defining your, here's the impact that I actually had given this role. I think it also, I mean, it does boost confidence for sure, because well, you walk around with imposter syndrome and then you look in the document and you say, oh, actually, contributed something at least. So it definitely helps.
Thank you so much. If you have more questions, please leave it on the chat. Thank you so much, Ludwig.
Thank you.